direction, pulling in the same way, and achieving impact and outcome. So I'm really delighted to join you in this conversation about leadership.
Great. Thanks so much, Catherine. Okay, so now I'm going to go in, I'm going to take a few minutes and just talk a little bit about some of the session today. What we're trying to accomplish today, as you know from the learning objectives, are really thinking about leadership opportunities. We're going to share with you some of the leadership models that we've seen on our teams and give you an opportunity, one, to be hearing from each other, as well as hearing from some content from us and hearing some of our lessons learned, but also to be sharing with each other, and hopefully there will be a rich discussion in the Q&A pod. So please feel free to type in there, and if there's information, resources, suggestions that you want to share with your colleagues on other teams, we encourage you to do that, and we will make sure that we have a copy of that on hand as well. We also want to be thinking about different aspects that are impacting leadership and management style and decision making. So we'll be talking a little bit about that today. We will also be looking at ways to lead and work together. It's a challenge. We know that this interagency work is not always easy, and we know also that the military-civilian world, sometimes they don't always mesh. We know that everybody has the same goal to really support our service members, veterans, and their families, but there's always opportunities to figure out some strategies and exchange ideas about ways to increase that collaboration and partnership. And then finally, we'll be looking for opportunities to explore strategies to sustain commitment and momentum. In the work that we've been doing with our teams, that momentum piece is really critical, and there are some lessons learned. For those of you, so many of you on the call I've worked with at a certain point, either in teamwork with you or in virtual sessions. I've been with the TA Center for over 7 years, and there's an awful lot of lessons that we've learned as we've worked with teams to see what can work well and what are opportunities to expand on the leadership opportunities within the team and the needs, as well as looking for opportunities to be helping pull other people into conversations as well. So that's what we'll be looking at today. I want to say that really the key word for today, before we move from this slide, now as we're moving to the housekeeping slide, is interactivity. So this is a 2-hour session. We know that's a bit of a chunk of time, but we want to be hearing from you. So we want you to use the pod on the right-hand side of the screen to share with you. And the chat is live. So you can go ahead and begin using that. The other piece that we'll ask you to be using is the questions from posting your questions or comments in the Q&A pod. So what you're going to see throughout this session is a lot of pauses. Catherine and I will talk a little bit, share a little bit of our insight, and then we're going to pause and we're going to ask you for questions. And you for suggestions and you for comments. So we think that the 2 hours is going to go by pretty quickly, and it will be even richer and more engaging the more that you all share what you're thinking and what your questions are. And then finally, just so you know, there will be presentation slides that will be emailed to each of you after the session. And then there's also an accompanying slide deck. Catherine Power is going to she may reference some slides, so we have uploaded another slide deck that she recently used that has some other information in it in case you want to reference that outside of the session. Okay. All right, so we're going to get your interactivity started right away, and we're going to launch a poll question. So our first question is, tell us what your team currently has. We want to get a little bit of a feel for those of you who are on the call, what your team configuration is. Do you have one team lead? Do you have co-leads? Or do you have something else? So let us know, and we'll give each of you just a minute to click on that and give everybody a feel for what the teams look like around the table. so we're going to wrap up the poll. All right, and so it's looking like the majority of our teams have one team lead. And we have a few people on the call who have multiple team leads, and a few others who have a different configuration. So, and for those of you who have a different configuration, feel free if you want to put that in the chat box, what you're seeing. That's great. That's great too. Part of what we're talking about today is also just different approaches. The one thing that I've learned in my years working with all of our teams learn an awful lot from each other, but no team is the same. And so each team, it's always fascinating to me in the team process and the group process how formulas, each team figures out what works best for them. So so feel free to share on that. Okay, so the reason why we're launching into this today is really thinking about the phases that all of you are moving towards, and all of you are at different points based on where you are in our TA process. Some of you have been a part of our Mayor's Challenge Policy Academy. Some of you have been part of our Governor's Challenge Policy Academy, and some of you have also been a part of our Governor's Challenge Implementation Academy. What you all have in common is that you're moving from policy into practice. All of you at team levels have been thinking about the policy aspect of the work that you need to do to reduce and end suicide among our service members, veterans, and their families. And all of our teams are thinking about how to make that happen. What are the activities? What are the actions? What are the practices that you're going to be rolling out and implementing? What's important about leadership is that leadership is critical to a solid infrastructure, and as you're moving forward with your detailed planning and really getting into the nitty-gritty of how you're rolling out these initiatives, having a solid team infrastructure and leadership in some capacity at all levels is really important. And what I want to say about the leadership conversation today is that while we all have team leads, every single team member has an opportunity to lead in some capacity. So I think most of us who came to this call was thinking that way. What I just wanted to be clear about is that we're not defining leadership in a really strict concept. We're defining it as an opportunity for all team members to have a role to help to move the work forward and figuring out how that makes the most sense for the team. Okay. All right, so what you have in front of you is a very detailed diagram. It is not a diagram that I expected you to spend a whole lot of time studying. The reason I put it up here is because it was shared by another one of our presenters at one of our last academies. And what this diagram is it's outlining what are determining factors of diffusion, dissemination, and implementation in a healthcare system. What's important is that it's extremely complex, as you can all see. What I stopped and did was I put the red circles in this model because right there, just in those 7 circles, you can see opportunities for leadership. And I thought it helped to illustrate opportunities, again, thinking not just of the team lead, but of all the different opportunities on teams as you're all rolling out your action plans, figuring out ways that people can be stepping in to support and move forward in a leadership capacity. So, whether it's thinking about the people who are doing the marketing and getting expert opinions, whether it's helping with the socio-political climate and recognizing the incentives and the mandates. All of those different pieces, there's power balances too when you're trying to figure out who's going to be a supporter and who's going to be an opponent. So I just called on 3 of those examples because there's all opportunities, they all pose as opportunities that we've seen with our teams, within our team's action planning, and they all provide opportunities for people to step up and help lead the work and figure out how to move the work forward. Thanks. There we go. Okay. So we have one more poll question that's going to give a little bit of a platform before I turn this over to my colleague, Catherine. But what I wanted all of you to do is take a minute and give a little bit of thought to what roles and functions you think are really critical for leaders. And you can click all that apply. And then again, similar to what we did with the last poll, if there's something else that we haven't included here that falls into the other category that you want to note, please do, and please share it. All right, thanks everybody for taking the time. There we go. All right, now we have the polling is just wrapping up, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Perfect. Okay, so what we're seeing is that the communicator piece got the highest ranking, and I know that both Catherine and I will be talking more about that as we go through the conversation. Accountability and decision-making were also the next two most highly ranked. Innovator, convener, are also very highly ranked. Oh, and facilitator, that one was also highly ranked. And okay, and I apologize, everybody, I'm reading these in a little bit out of order. The problem solver also. So to summarize, the communicator was the top, the accountability and decision maker and facilitator were the next three top ones that were selected, and then the problem solver was the next most popular. So. Okay, and the collaborator. Okay, all righty. So with that, I am now going to turn the next portion of the presentation over to Catherine. We're going to be talking, what she's going to touch on in this first piece is what really matters when it comes to successful team leadership. And again, just to remind all of you that Catherine's going to talk for a little bit, and then we want to hear from you. So as Catherine's talking, if there's questions that are bubbling up, please post them in the question pod. If there are comments that you want to make, we encourage you to do that as well. If there's information that you want to just supplement with and share, please do that also. So with that, Catherine, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And again, good afternoon to everyone. I'm delighted to join you. I think this is an unusual webinar in the sense that Michelle has asked me to really talk about this issue about leadership, but do it in a way that is quite conversational. You won't see PowerPoints. You won't see a lot of visual information in front of you, but that hopefully as I talk a little bit today, it will spur some thinking on your part about what your experiences are, what some of your observations are, what some of your thoughts are, what some of your recommendations are, and what some of your questions are across you all as a group that are engaged in this very important work around veteran suicide prevention. And you're doing it as a part of unique teams. And as Michelle said, you know, one team is one team. They are never alike, and they vary enormously in terms of size and shape and context, and they vary enormously in terms of the people who are on the team and what they bring to the collective of the team. I am going to be referring to a couple of the items that I talked about at the last Implementation Academy, which are basically the tasks of leadership And the tasks of leadership that I refer to are, I will occasionally refer to, there's actually 10 tasks. They are all referenced from the work of John Gardner, Gardner. So John Gardner is kind of my guru around looking at the tasks of leadership and thinking about how, if you understand what the tasks of leadership are, then we can encourage anyone and everyone to think about themselves as delivering a task, and therefore thinking about the joint effort as a leadership organization, not just a team effort, but a leadership organization. And since I think that infrastructure and sustainability of the kind of effort that you're doing in suicide prevention is a task of leadership, then therefore we can embed that in making sure that each team member has a sense of success relative to understanding their role in infrastructure development and in sustainability. I think the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that oftentimes we don't even tell people what we think of as a team. So what is a team? A team is basically a number of people that have been organized to function cooperatively as a group, and that we want to, over time, help them develop a shared sense of responsibility, a shared sense of accountability, a sense of harmony among themselves, and perhaps a spirit of open communication, which I think is interesting that you rated the communicator as the highest level of leadership. And I think one of the things that's important is for us all to understand who makes up the group of the team. And I think one of the crucial factors of the makeup of a team is the context. Is it the context coming in a time of calmness? Is it coming in a time of crisis? And I think that these teams at the mayor's challenge level and the governor's level have really come about as a result of a crisis. We see a crisis in veteran suicide. We see a crisis in the opioid epidemic. And so it's a very interesting observation that if we understand that the group is formed around the need to address this crisis, that really does have a contextual importance that I think means a lot to people. And then I think it's important for us to know personally and individually who are the members of the team and what are their characteristics. I mean, you should get to know your other team members, who they are, what's their age range, what's their education, what's their sense of competence in a professional field, what's the size of the team, what is the homogeneity of the team, what in fact motivates individual members as an individual and what motivates them as a group. And then how do we understand the morale of the team and what do we do to promote the morale of a team? And then how do we note the rate of turnover on a team and what do we do about the rate of turnover? So I think there's some important questions to constantly be asking yourself as a team member or as a leader about what does my team look like today on Tuesday, and could I answer the questions about how to describe them? I think the overarching rule for me in terms of building teams is that I do want to equate success with teamwork. In other words, we only succeed when we have done the teamwork. Nobody succeeds individually. And that the leader is reinforced by the members, continuously stating what the cultural values are. What is it that your city or your state believes in culturally as a value, and how do you reflect that in the work that you're doing with veterans? And then how do you establish a core identity? I know a lot of the teams come up with team names, they come up with mottos, they come up with logos, with symbols. I mean, it's a very important point that a lot of the team members come together as volunteers, and therefore to be able to have a core identity is an established issue, I think, to make sure that there is successful team leadership. I think the other thing I want to mention is that for leaders and for constituents and members of the team, we always want to be focused on building a sense of individual accomplishment in that context of equating success with teamwork. And we do that by building enthusiasm, by building a spirit, by really trying to remain totally mission-focused. And I think that's one of the strengths of the mayor's challenge and the governor's challenge, is that it's very mission-focused on what impact you want to make. And staying focused on that throughout your process is hugely important. And I think it's also important for each team member to know that they place the entire team above any individual, and they build mutual respect. And one of the most important things, again, which gets back to your point about communication, is that we keep on helping each other to stay informed. So whether that's the leader's role, whether that's the team member's role, whether it's the membership role, in toto, we make sure that we see successful team leadership is evidenced by helping keep everyone informed. Now, I know you all know about the 4 stages of group development, so I'm not going to go into that at all, but I think it's important that when you look at the 4 stages of group development, that you are also really thinking about the kinds of players that generally show up on teams. And generally there's 4 kinds of players. There are movers. There are people who initiate sequences and give direction. There are followers who support moves and bring closure. There are opposers who oppose a move and who want to make corrections or alterations. And there are bystanders. There's people who observe and who comment and who question and who reframe and who often bring perspective. And though there are many other types of players in a group, those are the kinds of individuals who generally will make up your team. And I think the way that we accommodate all of those differences is that we do team problem solving. And I think team problem solving is where you all are. You are all trying to solve a problem. And the way in which you're going to be successful is to have a process for team problem solving. And that process is basically one of analysis. You analyze the problem. You're determining the root causes. You're looking for not the 100% perfect solution, but what we call the 70% solution. You're brainstorming solutions. You're thinking about options that you might want to take, and then you're testing the suitability and the feasibility and the acceptability of those options. You're all presenting recommendations for the way in which you want to solve the problem, and then you're monitoring the implementation solution. And then you're looking every week, every day, every month to make improvements and do sort of a continuous quality improvement process on trying to implement the recommendations that you're making. So for me, looking at all of those pieces really matter if you want successful team leadership. That is understanding the component parts of your team, making sure that you are defining success with teamwork, and that you're building a sense of individual accomplishment within the context of the cultural values, and that you're helping everyone keep informed along the process of team problem solving. So, Michelle, I'm going to stop there, and we'll see if folks have any comments or considerations.
That's great. Thanks so much, Catherine. I appreciate it. And again, I know we keep talking about the communication component, the informing piece. I think there's not enough we can do to stress that, and I'm so pleased that so many of our teams recognize that, because we've certainly watched over time that is the critical element to keeping the work moving forward and sustaining the momentum. So we're going to pause now, and we'll take a few minutes to think about challenges that perhaps have emerged as all of you are thinking about leadership within your teams. We won't spend too much time on this one, but I would welcome you if there's anybody who wants to share maybe something that's emerged early in your process, or something that you've already dealt with and successfully have dealt with, and maybe it's something you've observed yourself that you just want to pass along as a lesson learned. We'll probably, towards the end of the session, we'll revisit this and just see if there's anything else that bubbled up. But what you can do in the Q&A pod is if you have a question related to this piece, or if there's a comment that you'd like to make, please go ahead and type that in. What we do see with leadership, sometimes the challenge is figuring out who is the leader and who's been delegated. That can definitely be a bit of a challenge. We've had such different formulas. Sometimes a governor very directly puts someone in as a team leader. Other times a governor will delegate someone to delegate a person. And some of those aspects can have an impact on how the team continues to work and what ends up happening with that work. But what I will say is that no matter how someone is delegated, I'm always amazed at how well the teams make their formula work. Some very high-level teams, we've had teams that have had members, we even had a first lady on one of our teams who obviously had a very direct connection to their governor's office. But I'm sure that came with challenges as well. So if there are any, all right, I'm not seeing any questions. Okay, great, Andrea. And thank you again for taking the time to type in. On our group, if you could all just give a thought and respond to how do you deal with a leader who may be opinionated and inserts their own opinion too often, and thank you. That's a great suggestion for a question. So does anybody want to weigh in here? And you can do that in either the chat log or the Q&A log, and we will leave that out. Okay. And Catherine, I have a feeling you have some thoughts too about.
Yeah, I do. I was just thinking about the fact that certainly the challenges that I personally faced, and I'm sure others have, is this whole notion, especially when you're working in civic and governmental environments like mayors and governors' offices, is that this whole process about small p, political, and getting political and being political is a very difficult thing for people to rally around. And I think that that one of the things that's interesting is that it's curious that a process like the political process, which is so essential to a pluralistic society, has actually a pretty bad reputation. In other words, the notion of being political is somehow has some negativity associated with it. I'm not quite sure why. So I've always found that it's important for people to know that if you're involved in a team effort, there will be inevitable political processes that you have to be engaged in. And I don't mean big P political, like a bipartisan or partisan kind of thing, but a small p, meaning that the political process that you're involved in generally means taking into account the needs or the demands, and sometimes those needs and demands can be mutually conflicting, of different constituencies, the weighing of the realities of power and calculating the consequences of that power, negotiating all of that, bargaining, and doing those kinds of things. Now, if you're a dictator, you don't worry about those things. You just go ahead and do what you want to do. But I think that there is a usefulness to helping people think about the political process and the political efforts that are necessary in order to maintain a focus on belonging to a goal. And I think that politics often is seen as getting in the way of simplicity. Politics complicates things. And I think that's why people shy away from it or shy away from wanting to be engaged in it. And so I'm hoping that people will be unafraid to step in and say, my governor or my mayor believes these things. I mean, they're elected people generally. And so if they're elected, they have to have put forward a political strategy. And therefore, you're engaged in a political process that is not necessarily tainted by, quote, unquote, politics per se. So it's an interesting that's always been a challenge. I've worked for Democratic and Republican governors. I've worked with lots of different mayors of different parties, independents, and I think that I've always felt like people, even if they're not involved in the political process, need to be unafraid to step into a political conversation because they will learn a lot. And they will learn a lot about balancing constituency needs and balancing consequences and all of those skills that I think are important in a democracy.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Catherine. And we also had a couple of responses. Tim Kiesling from Texas had noted to hear them out, to figure out perspective and angle and determine if it brings value. Find value in the voice of dissent, which is a lot of what you were saying too, Catherine. Determine fit for the project work being done. Parking lot group norm to address issues that do not add to the solution, and determine when the discussion needs to be one-on-one versus group speak. And Tim, thanks very much for all of those points. I think you're touching on so many of the really critical elements. You're giving voice to the people who maybe who need the voice on the team. You're empowering them, but you're also allowing the process to move forward. So I think those are all really great suggestions. And then Will Smith from our Suffolk County team noted that I think having a shared sense of responsibility and accountability for the problem is a central issue for myself as part of the team. With so many responsibilities as my own job, this additional project really challenges my sense of responsibility to the team. And we thanks for sharing that, Will, because I know that's something that we acknowledge when we're working with our teams, that so many people are doing this work. The vast majority of people are doing this work in addition to the work that they have that they have back in their office place. So it's agreeing to take on tasks, trying to see it through as best you can, but other times priorities take over. So I want to validate that challenge and really note that there are opportunities. Again, that's where the communication piece comes in. So trying to make sure that a team has some solid structure, that when someone doesn't have enough time to meet the deadline or do what they promised within the window that was outlined, that then that's communicated back and there's some opportunity. So it goes again to that communication being so helpful. Nicole French from our Mecklenburg team says that we bring attention to guiding principles for group communication, respect courageously saying ouch when you have a reaction to what has been said, and of course we can't read each other's minds, and then informing the group when you're practicing a stretch. And I'm lucky enough to have seen the Mecklenburg team really utilize these tools really well. I've seen them do that in a team meeting, and I think you have all developed a really great level of respect so that you're all comfortable sharing that with each other. And so I'm really glad that all of you have offered these different insights, because it definitely speaks to opportunities for leadership and helping the teamwork move forward. So, and then Nicole also noted, she had a question. We've been unable to get our mayor or her staff involved in this mayor's challenge, which is a challenge, right, Nicole? And any suggestions on how to bring key people to the table? So thanks so much for raising that, Nicole. I know that we talked a little bit about that on your site visit, and so this is another piece, and Nicole has allowed us to tee up that other component that we really hope will be utilized today. So for those of you around the table who have successfully engaged your leadership, let us know in the chat log what you did to make that happen, or if you want to have a separate conversation with Nicole too, you can just note that, and we can look at an opportunity to connect you via phone. So thanks so much for sharing that. Okay, I think we can move to the...
Michelle, let me add that...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things often that I find is helpful is that depending on the individual that you want to try to engage and influence, it has to almost come from a peer of some sort. Finding another champion peer that the mayor would pay attention to, finding another champion governor that the governor would pay attention to. In other words, the Mayor's Association and the Governor's Association, that it may be helpful to find some person that would engage the person in a one-on-one conversation about the importance of the issue. And it may not percolate up to the mayor from her staff or his staff, but there may be an opportunity to find another mayor locally or across the state or in the Mayor's Association that she might admire, and that might be a way to have sort of a peer influence and bringing it into a conversation that says, we think this is an important issue. I also think that it's sometimes very helpful to get someone who has experienced either military service or a suicide in their family that they may know. In other words, if they know about people that have served, or they know about military people in their constituency, or they know someone that has lived with the challenge of a suicide attempt or a suicide, that sometimes also can be a very profound and personal way in which to gain some sort of traction.
That's great, Catherine. Thank you so much for those concrete suggestions. And also just want to thank Kim Donahue. She also posed a question with some ideas as well that Nicole could use, reaching out to council members who work under the mayor, maybe engaging them almost as that champion that Catherine was suggesting, or maybe if there's a veteran engagement officer in the mayor's office, or maybe a veteran themselves. So thank you, Kim. And again, keep them coming. Other suggestions as we're continuing through the session, feel free. They'll be all cataloged. So I know I tend to be somebody who thinks about a response long after the question has happened. So feel free to type them in, and we'll make sure that they're shared with the group.
And Michelle, I want to also just respond to William Smith's comment. I thought he picked right up on the issue of shared responsibility and accountability in terms of the team, and his comment about the fact that his serious approach to making sure that the problem is addressed, but being responsible and accountable for the issue, even though that's not his direct job, is an important, I think, component part for all the team members, because most of the team members have other jobs, as you noted. And I think that it's the leaders and team constituencies' responsibility to suggest that there should be some joyful opportunities to celebrate and to talk about the achievements, so that it's not just responsibility and accountability, but that there are achievements which can be talked about and can be celebrated and can be a joyful opportunity for the team to rally around. I think that helps, especially with those people who are volunteering their time. I think that really is a strong message of leadership to be able to say, today's the day we're going to thank each other for the work that we're doing.
Terrific. Thank you, Catherine, and you're so right. Okay, so now let's move. I think we're going to transition over and talk a little bit about strengthening your team's leadership capacity. So I'm going to have Catherine talk about that. And then my colleague Phil is actually going to type into the chat box the question that we'll pose to all of you to give you a little bit of time to think about. Maybe there's something you want to pose as Catherine's talking and sharing her thoughts on this portion of the conversation. And then two, if you have questions yourself that are coming up as Catherine's talking, you're welcome to add those in the Q&A pod as well. Catherine, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. I think thinking about developing and strengthening your team's leadership capacity came about as a theme from the last Implementation Academy, because many people were saying that they really wanted to work on not just selecting team leadership or obtaining team leadership because they had been appointed to it, but that using the governors and mayors' challenges as an opportunity for individuals to have to have a place or a task where they could actually learn new skills. And I think that that was an important element, that people were beginning to understand that, wow, we've got this team of 10 people or 25 people or 30 people, and we can actually use this as an opportunity to help people refine their skills, learn new skills. It's not just who they are and what they represent or what their role is that they bring to the table on the team, but it's also that we can give people an opportunity to strengthen their own individual leadership capacity and then in a group setting allow them to strengthen the team's larger leadership capacity. So I think I want to start with the fact that, again, my issue about leadership is that we have to always constantly talk about what does it mean to be a leader, and just having that conversation with the team is an interesting conversation. And how do we go about achieving leadership for ourselves, and what do we think the core competencies of leadership are? And then if you know what those core competencies or tasks are, then you can set your team's actions based on achieving those core tasks and assigning responsibility or having people volunteer for it. So first and foremost, I always say that leadership rests in relationships and it rests in reciprocity. And so if we're helping individuals on the team as well as the team as a whole develop skills in building relationships and in strengthening partnerships, that in and of itself is building leadership capacity. And then after you have developed either connections or relationships or more formal partnerships, then you have to figure out how do you make those networks, connections, and relationships reciprocal. And there is a key leadership issue. How do you think through what is reciprocal in a relationship that is sometimes probably pretty hard to define? I don't think money's exchanging hands here. I don't think products are changing hands. I think this is all sort of influence and communication and sort of the softer side of what you can reciprocally exchange. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that I did in the federal government was that SAMHSA is a very small agency, and we only have 600 people. The rest of the Department of Health and Human Services is tremendously large, 15 other service agencies. So when the President's New Freedom Commission came out, I was charged with helping transform mental health care in America. And I said, well, how about we start with the federal government getting smart about mental health? Well, there weren't that many agencies at HHS that even cared about mental health, and this was in 2003. And so this notion about trying to get, HHS agencies like HRSA and IHS and CDC to care about mental health was a problem. And so I had to go peer-to-peer across the agencies and invite my peers across those other HHS agencies and say, the President wants us to transform mental health care in America, and the Secretary wants us to do that. So if they want us to do that, then what are we going to do together? And how can you promoting mental health in your agency, what can I do to promote your issues in SAMHSA? And so you began to understand that there was a reciprocity here, that if CDC would open up its heart and mind to talk about mental health and substance use disorder, then I would do everything I can to promote prevention and making sure that we look at the issues that CDC cared about, which a lot of it was violence prevention at the time. And so we began to see how we could have reciprocal relations that I think was a key in terms of leading the federal group forward in transformation. Now, if you start with sort of looking at basic leadership issues, you want to start with what do we mean by what leadership should exhibit. And basically, I think there's sort of three basic rules. And by the way, all these will be in the notes that Michelle said she would load up for you. So you'll be able to get a copy of these from the notes. That there are three basic world viewpoints. The first is the golden rule, that you should treat everyone the same as you want to be treated. The second rule is that you should right the wrong, that you should bring fairness where it has not existed before. And then 3, you should value all differences. You should appreciate what everyone brings from their heritage and their culture. If you follow those 3 basic world viewpoints, you are in a leadership role. And then you can take your team and walk them through different tasks of leadership. And those are the tasks that are listed with John Gardner. And so he talks about 10 specific tasks, and I'm going to choose one of the tasks to talk about in the next minute. One of the tasks that John Gardner says is one of the most important tasks of leadership is explaining, which is exactly what you've ranked as the number one issue when you say you look at the leadership as a communicator. But every single team member, not just the leader, can do the explaining. You can step out into public roles. You can step out into group meetings. You can step out into presentations and do the explaining about why suicide is important, why it's an epidemic, why it's a public health crisis, why it's important for the veteran situation, why it's important in terms of certain groups, and be able to explain to multiple publics why you are doing what you're doing. So you've taken one of the tasks of leadership and been able to use it. And that everybody around your team table can do that. Everybody around your team table can get better at explaining what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. And once again, that's one of the tasks of leadership, and it's probably, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most important, because that's what you spend your time doing, no matter what role you're in. And I think that we can strengthen the team's leadership capacity by focusing on that particular task. So, Michelle, I'll stop there, and we'll go on for comments.
Great. Thank you so much. And I see there's already a couple of comments being typed in. The thing that I wanted to highlight based on your comments, Catherine, is what I kind of call that power of personal invite, something that really can be helpful no matter who you are in the team. It is that reaching out to the person, as you were noting, Catherine, and really tapping people. I've found often when I need someone to do something, if I speak to them personally, make the case, and really think about how I can partner with them on an issue, it's pretty rare that they'll say no. And so that can be a nice opportunity. And I think sometimes we forget how much people are willing to help as long as they're asked. So having said that, I also just want to touch on, so Kim Donahue from our Truckee Meadows team mentioned that her team has been doing many outside team building activities that have allowed us as a team to get to know each other on a deeper level. I love that. And she said she's also enjoyed watching those that I thought would be a bystander become a mover. So that's really exciting. And Kim, if you had any examples of team building activities that you wanted to share, please feel free to put them in there, and we'll make sure we pass them along. And then Claire Oakley from our Billings, Montana team, reciprocity is essential to keep people engaged. Since Dog Tag Buddy stepped up and will take on coordinating our secure firearm storage campaign, it seemed reasonable that they would represent us as one of the 3 reps to the Safe Messaging Conference in July. Safe messaging is an important part of creating a safe community for all, and having a young team member bring this information back to the team provides her with a leadership role. Thanks, Claire. I'm really glad you noted a couple of really key pieces. First of all, thank you very much for mentioning the conference that we're busy planning, and we're hoping to have all of our teams represented at that event. It's really fantastic You're so right. Catherine touched on earlier that diversity component, and sometimes our teams aren't necessarily thinking about the diversity piece, but also the younger voices and incorporating that conversation into the dialogue as well, and diversity from all different perspectives. So you're really helping to touch on a few of those different pieces. Okay, and then Kim did respond. She just said they train for a rock hike, and they meet and they take different hikes each week, pushing yourselves to go further. That is so great. And they're also doing climbing as a team and including your family members. Very, very cool. So thanks so much for sharing that, both Claire and Kim. Okay, if there are any other questions or comments that you want to share at this point, Catherine, are there any other pieces that you wanted to jump in on before we move to the next topic?
Well, I think that there's a message about a commitment. I mean, I'm curious about how team members see themselves either learning from their team engagement, and is there expectation that something could help strengthen their own leadership capacity, or do they really see this as solely sort of building the team's goals and strategies rather than sort of their own personal development? I'm just curious about how, because what I heard at the Implementation Academy was that it was kind of a new thinking for some of the team members to say, gee, I didn't even think about what I personally might be able to derive from this experience, not just the fact that I want to reduce and eliminate veteran suicide.
That's a really great point, because all of these opportunities, we grow so much from all of these opportunities. So I think it's another part that we have to stress. So
right.
Right. Okay. So now do we have one more question? Oh, okay. And Tim Kiesling from our Texas team noted that ask the team participants which key leaders are missing from the table, and ask them which work group or role they would be most appropriate to fill. Ask if you may reach out to their identified leader and use the team member as your reference. Importantly, have an independent conversation and recommend key leaders to discuss the work, the desired outcomes, and ask how the person feels they could contribute. All excellent suggestions. Again, Tim, thanks so much. And I also will take this opportunity. I've talked a lot to teams over the years about a fear that teams will have about becoming too big. And that is certainly something you want to be considering as you're moving forward. But there are opportunities to engage people without having 50, 60, 70-person meetings. Subcommittees, and we'll talk a little bit more about those as we move further on in the conversation, but everything that Tim is pointing to allows further engagement of other stakeholders and getting more people to the table for conversation, and also leadership opportunities, but there's also strategic ways to manage that input so that your team doesn't become so overwhelming and you can't get anything done. So I'm glad you brought that up as well, Tim, so thanks so much. Okay, so now the next topic that we're going to talk a little bit about is gaining leadership buy-in, and Nicole, you already helped to tee this up a little bit. So we'll take a little time to talk about this. We'll take a little time to hear from Catherine, and if there are any other suggestions relating to leadership buy-in. But Catherine, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. I think that the notion of focusing on leadership commitment and leadership buy-in is an important element, whether we're talking about suicide prevention plan or we're talking about any kind of shared work that is looking for impact and looking for outcomes. I think that to start with, I think that the leadership role could probably be characterized in two ways. First of all, ask the question, is the leadership role in our team, is it a diffusion model? That is there work that's assigned across a broad spectrum of teams or sub-teams or work groups? Or is it a concentrated leadership role that the concentration of much of the work is really concentrated in a single person or co-leads, and then they in turn distribute or share or assign tasking across the group. And I think it's really important because these groups are also different, that if we can fundamentally say that leadership is often best thought of as a function within the organization. And if it's a function within the organization, then good leadership and good team membership are always blending into each other. And that leadership is not automatically vested in whoever has all the formal authority. So I think it's important to see this as a fluid kind of leadership, constituency group, membership flow. And they're always blending into each other in ways that are important. So if you are a leader and you are exhibiting appropriate leadership skills in this team effort, I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that as a leader, you are going to find yourself, or you will find your leaders, coping with all of the fabulous, wonderful, great, bureaucratic, institutional systems that hold our society together. You're going to interact with the legal system, with politics and government, with the economic system, with the media, with government relations, all of those things. And you are also, interestingly enough, and likely to have an exposure to other worlds. Certainly you have an exposure to the healthcare system, to the VA, to academia, to churches, to the caregivers of the world within the behavioral health system, the institutions of the nonprofit world. All of those things you'll get a chance to interact with, because you will either be a leader or you will be a part of a group that needs to interact with those in terms of building the networks, the partnerships, and the collaborations that we talked about earlier. And we really do need leaders that understand how to manage all of the interconnectedness of the basic task. So if your basic task is to reduce veteran suicide, what are the building blocks to get to that task in terms of the interconnectedness of the systems with which you have to interact? And I think that it's helpful for leaders to really look beyond some of those systems that they might be heading and to grasp some of the relationships to some of the larger realities. So I'm going to talk for a second about 4 particular areas that I think it's important, that they're critically important, that leaders themselves must exhibit and that they need to engage and teach other people to do. The first one is agreement building. And I think leaders are going to have all those skills that we expect in conflict resolution, in mediation, in compromise, in building coalitions. And, of course, the capacity to build trust is essential in agreement building, and using, again, the judgment and the, quote, political skills to deal with different constituencies. The second skill that I think is important is networking. I think if I can say one thing about my federal jobs and my state jobs is that on top of explaining all the time, I had to be constantly networking. I had to be linking. I couldn't stay in my office. I had to be linking the constituencies we serve with the provider groups, with the healthcare system. I wanted people to care about mental health and behavioral health as much as SAMHSA did. In order to do that, I have to get them to care about it. And so we have to be networking all the time in a very changing environment and establish the linkages, personal and professional and institutional, and make sure that we are creating and sustaining those linkages even as there is constant change going on. So agreement building was the first one, networking was the second one. The third one is, and one that's really quite interesting and difficult, is to exercise non-jurisdictional power. And oftentimes leaders in government agencies or corporations do a lot of their leadership through internal decisions, and they have a power that is inherent in them because of their institutional position. But a lot of the leadership that goes on, especially in the kind of work groups that you're in, you deal all the time on many fronts with groups over whom you have absolutely no jurisdiction. And no matter what your role is, wherever you are, whatever role you carry from your institutional position will not be decisive enough to carry the day. You have to know how to exercise other legitimate forms of power, using the power of the media, using the power of public opinion, using the power of ideas, using the power that accrues to individuals who fully understand how the system works and yet can move above those systems and talk leader to leader with folks who are sitting in other sectors. And then the fourth skill I think of in terms of leadership is institution building. Veteran suicide is a complex issue, and it's complex politically, it's complex emotionally, it's complex clinically, and you just can't have people who are untutored in these issues to be making the kinds of strategies that will be the most effective. So we have to construct a responsive system that will build problem-solving capability and preside over those systems with leadership that will, over time, institutionalize and sustain the tasks and the goals and the actions that you put into play. I think it's hugely important for leaders to be thinking about those skills, exhibiting those skills, and teaching those skills so that when those leaders leave, that there is a process there is a legacy, there is a succession planning process going on, that if you can focus on those four skills and teach people those skills and allow people to be exposed to those skills, then there is continuity for making sure that the institutional change, the cultural change, and the social change needed to happen will happen. And then finally, I think it's important that we do a lot of work with the team and with our policy academies and with our mayor's challenge teams and with our governor's challenge teams, that we do we play more in the building of the skills in what is known as the arts of democracy, quote unquote democracy. And I think those skills are also not necessarily what you learn in school, not necessarily what you learn on the job if you don't have a job that deals with that, but you can learn to do those things just like all the other tasks of leadership. You can learn to do those things about teaching them. So leadership buy-in becomes a part of engaging in the public dialogue and conflict management and resolution. And if you can gain leadership buy-in across the public arts of democracy, that's where you can have exposure to a whole range of different leaders looking at what you're doing, whether it's the healthcare system, whether it's the political system, the government system, the not-for-profit sector. You can show that you have effective public education skills in complex policy problems and that you can do collective problem solving and group facilitation so that you can show them that there will be an effective set of tools, strategies, and tactics that will in fact address suicide prevention in their communities. So I think that as long as we can teach people to do that kind of visible expression of the arts of democracy, then that helps other leaders come to the table and be a part of the solution for making sure that you achieve the goals in suicide prevention. So I'll stop there, Michelle.
Great. Thanks so much, Catherine. Now what we're moving into, and Phil typed in the question, what levels and types of leadership buy-in is needed to support the development and implementation of an effective SMVF suicide prevention plan? We know that the leadership buy-in is so critical for your teams, and every team is looking at it in different ways, and Nicole raised a question earlier on in the conversation. But are there other thoughts from those of you who are on the call about some of the leadership buy-in that you're hoping to see with your team, within your team? There may be an entity who you have not connected with yet, who you're hoping to get engaged, and then also just that upper-level leadership in some of the city government settings or county government settings or state government settings. So let us know if you have any comments or concerns or thoughts on that, or even any successes, too. Sometimes it's just giving that thought of, what elected official, maybe somebody who could be a good advocate who you can get the ear of and really help to get engaged. So if there are any questions or comments, feel free to type them in. And Catherine, is there any other thoughts based on the experience that you had? Certainly, and I know you touched on it a little bit when you talked about that the charge that you had and the outreach that you did to engage. Any suggestions that you have for leadership buy-in at the state level or the community level that the teams may not have thought of up to this point?
Well, I think one of the things that is important and, frankly, is often overlooked is that it's helpful initially to do homework on who you're trying to engage. In other words, it was very important for me to understand a little bit about, on the federal level, other federal agencies' missions and how I could tie in the mission that I had to a footnote to their mission or a footnote to some of their strategies. It takes some homework to do, and I think that oftentimes we don't necessarily do the homework. We have to kind of understand in either a federal agency or a state agency, what's their main mission and vision? What are some of their major policies and regulations? What are some of the laws governing their mission? And I think that I really had to do my homework every time either a federal agency changed hands politically or there was a different emphasis or governors changed offices and there were different cabinet officials, that I really needed to spend a little bit of time doing the homework, trying to find where I thought the importance, again, of building the relationship, but also, again, building that reciprocity that I think is so important. And I think that I often find, again, it depends on the sectors. So understanding the differences in the sectors between the military sector, the government sector, the nonprofit sector, the profit sector, philanthropy, business, healthcare sector, all of those, it's important to see where each agency or provider or where leadership of those agencies, where they stand and how the historical, political, and social situation in which they function might dictate the level and degree of their buy-in in terms of where they might go. One of the things I found is interesting, at least in looking at the policy academies across the states and particularly at suicide prevention, and I've been involved in suicide prevention for many, many, many years, and SAMHSA leads the federal agencies in suicide prevention, and we're still not quite at the point where we need to be in terms of showing impact and what is the most effective way to work in terms of prevention messaging. And trying to get CDC on the prevention side involved in this, and now VA is very much involved in terms of predictive analytics, and everybody's sort of moving along a continuum that says, well, we need to have a different set of eyes on it. But at the same time, I am concerned that we are still talking about a percentage of the population that, frankly, most people don't care about. Most people don't care about the wars and the conflicts of the wars. Most people not necessarily don't care about veterans or the military, except on, D-Day maybe they care, or Memorial Day, but they don't necessarily think about it. We have all of these deaths of despair going on. We have the opioid epidemic. We have all of these sort of negative perceptions, and to break through that and to move through that, to talk about positive prevention interventions and interceptions so that we can save lives is a really important message, I think. And I think you have to practice that, and you have to practice that, I think, with getting different messages to different leadership and get their buy-in, and then you've got them on your side, and they can replicate your message to other constituency groups with whom they interact. And I think then it becomes exponentially a multiplier effect, and it takes on a much more positive and productive approach than some people just want to stay on sort of the negative side of it, but we want to move to a much more positive message about what we're trying to achieve.
Well, and you're so right on that, Catherine. And one of the things that we've talked about in some of our team meetings is that opportunity for positive messaging can really be a nice leverage piece with politicians and with the people who want some visibility. And it can sound a little bit awkward to be framing it in that conversation, but it is an opportunity to get some additional buy-in and often additional support because they want the positive visibility. So what are those opportunities that our teams can be thinking about? I wanted to also just look at a couple of the comments that we have in the chat box. And Tim from Texas suggested that state government and state agency executive leadership, county commissioners, sheriffs, PDs, police departments, fire departments, EMS and community centers, veteran service organizations, specifically the major players like the VFW and the DAV, American Legion, et cetera, at the state level and regional level, they're all influencers. And influencers is a great word that we all need to be thinking about. And they can advocate in ways that state, county, and municipality employees can't. And that's a great point as well. As we're thinking about roles for all of our team members, some people have more flexibility and have an opportunity to have a voice in certain places and on certain issues that others don't. So I'm really glad you pointed that out, Tim. And then Claire from our Billings team said we have the Veterans Affairs rep from U.S. Senator Tester's office, Tester Dane, and Congressman Gianfortes at our meetings, and that's wonderful. And you're right, though, Claire, you're noting they're not worker bees, and that's an excellent point, too, because a lot of times they're carrying a message back, and so it's a little bit of a different role, but it's also figuring out how their roles can support your work. And it's true because then you also need the people who are going to help move the action plan forward and do the work outside of the meetings. So that's a great point, Claire, and I appreciate you raising it because you don't want a team full of representatives who are just carrying the message back. You need a balance. She says it's taken time for this to develop, and they're in much better shape in 2019, but we still need more worker beat participation to make bigger impacts and greater action plan outcomes. So thanks so much for sharing, Claire. I appreciate it. Okay, so Catherine, any other pieces you wanted to add before we move to the next section?
I don't think so. I think we're doing fine. Yeah.
All right. So now I think we're going to move into this topic of using training and supervision to enhance leadership capacity. And again, I'll ask my colleague Phil to just type in the question that we'll pose to all of you. And Catherine, if you just wanted to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about this, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I think now I'm going to kind of segue to looking more closely at the other tasks of leadership and how using training and supervision to enhance leadership capacity really flow from the opportunity to perform the tasks of leadership that were envisioned by John Gardner. And I think that, again, my principle about building leadership capacity is that I basically want everyone to understand that they can be an effective leader, and they can be an effective leader in whatever venue or role they choose. But it also means that they have to be aware of, in order to be an effective leader, that you have to create an alignment and a cohesion and a coherence between who you are, what you believe, and what you do. So whatever training and supervision we invoke, it has to help people think about who they are, what they believe, and what they do. And in doing that, it helps them develop their own leadership capacity individually, and then also helps them understand the team leadership capacity that they can be contributing to. So the first, and again, each of these tasks, there are selected exercises that if you go to Gardner's work, there are selected exercises that you can use to help train and supervise individuals who want to enhance this leadership capacity. And the first one is envisioning goals. You have to be able to write down and to articulate what is the goal that you want to achieve within your own individual work, within the team work, within the larger challenge work, within the state, within the region, et cetera. So being able to say, I envision this goal, and it's not just 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 5 years. It's also over the horizon kind of thinking. The second task is to affirm values. There are incredibly important issues that need to be stated in terms of what are the values upon which this enterprise rests. So if you look at the military services, each one of the military services has what are known as inherent values, integrity or courage or honor or duty or whatever the case may be. It's important that in your leadership endeavor, you are affirming certain values. I always use the example that since I worked for the state of Rhode Island for many, many years, the motto of the state of Rhode Island is hope. I used that in everything that I did in the state in terms of working in behavioral health and mental health, substance use disorders, developmental disabilities. I mean, there is a motto of a state that is totally a quality of and a value that I could affirm in multiple ways, through history, through the provision of services, through the changing of services, the changing of regulations, the changing of practice, affirming the values. So there are always going to be values that your state, your city, your team want to affirm. The third task is nurturing and motivating. And I think that even informally, you are all doing nurturing team member by team member, and you're doing motivation. And how do you go about motivating each other to be successful? And there are skills and there are opportunities in training, tasking that can demonstrate nurturing and motivating. The fourth task of leadership is managing. And in many cases, managing is the work. That is, under managing, we talk about, well, you set an agenda, you plan, you set priorities, you organize, and you help the system function. It's sort of the daily, bit by bit, step by step management of the work. And I'm telling you, I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to on multiple levels that never had agendas. That's a mistake. You should always have an agenda for a meeting. Or there's nobody that's planning for the next event. Or there are no priorities set. Well, we got 5 things we have to do. What are the priorities? And the organization of work. Well, let's just see what happens. I mean, all of these things are extraordinarily important. So this whole concept of managing, you can really train people in and supervise them in how to set an agenda, how to do planning, how to set priorities, how to organize, and how to monitor the system functioning, which is really, I think, the kinds of things that you're doing with Rand and with Terry Tennille in terms of looking at your data. The fifth task of leadership is making decisions. Yes, no, up, down, over, out, whatever it may be, somebody has to make decisions. And you can do that either collectively as a group, or you can invest in co-leads making the decisions, or a single appointed leader making a decision, but there has to be some clarity about who makes the decisions and at what level. But you have to make them, then you are a leader. The sixth task is achieving unity. And again, I think this harkens back to your comment about how communications and decision-making and facilitation are highly skilled qualities in leadership. Achieving unity means you're helping different constituencies come to the realization and resolution that what is the decision is either a compromise or it's what everyone agrees to, and or people can live with it. And so this whole notion of we are moving forward as a unified front, or we are moving forward as a divided front, only majority rules, whatever those rules are about achieving unity, you need to invoke. The seventh task is explaining. I think I've already gone over that in some detail, so I won't do that again. The eighth task of leadership is serving as a symbol. Everywhere you go, you are a member of this team. Everywhere you go, you care about veteran suicide. Everywhere you go, you are known to be involved in this important effort. So you will serve as a symbol of the larger mayoral effort, the larger governor's effort, and you need to act as if you are the symbol. And know that no matter where you are and no matter what you're doing, you will be the symbol of that effort that you're involved in, and therefore you will act accordingly. The ninth task is representing the group. You represent the 20 veterans a day who are completing suicide. You represent the 9 million veterans that are treated in the VA system. You represent the 2 million veteran families, or the 2 million active duty children. You represent all of that population. Whenever I got up in front of a group of people, I always said, I have 43 million people with mental illness standing behind me. And representing the group is what you're all about. And you can teach people to talk about it that way and to think about it that way and to show an effort in training people to speak about it that way. And then the final task is renewing, making sure that you cycle through and cycle back and implement and check and implement and check and keep on renewing and keep on pushing forward to the goals that you have. And again, there are exercises that people can do that are truly important and truly helpful to people in terms of using that task to help enhance leadership capacity. I'm going to take just a couple more seconds to say that, Michelle, I will share another piece with you that you can put up on the in the data bank on some management principles that I think are really helpful, and that I think that when you take a look at some of the management principles that you can also teach to, some of the management principles that I utilize are really effective. In other words, cross-training should be part of your management principle, or making sure that you continuously train to be effective no matter what technologies are available. So it's an interesting thought to then say, well, if we didn't have technology, how would we be getting out the message to the people that we care about? And I think that I had mentioned earlier, one of the management principles is that we need to aim for the 70% solution, and you need to task people with, all right, we need a solution here, but it's always better to decide quickly on a not quite so perfect plan or goal than to roll out an absolutely perfect plan when it is far too late. You know, we have a crisis. We need to address the crisis. We need to start doing things to meet the crisis. We cannot wait for the perfect plan. So many times we can give people small tasks, give them an opportunity to come up with solutions that I talked about earlier in terms of adaptability and feasibility and accountability, and be able then to say, we're going to move this forward. There are tremendous, tremendous opportunities here relative to using specific training modules and training tasks to be able to enhance the leadership capacity on both an individual level, on a team level, and on a larger policy academy level. So I'll stop there, Michelle.
Catherine, thanks so much. And if any of you have any suggestions on leadership, on training and supervision related to leadership capacity, please feel free to type that in. Also, of course, if you have any questions. The one piece I did want to note, we are going to put together a couple of resources that are some pieces that we're familiar with that can help with that training and supervision component. One resource that I've found helpful in some leadership work that I've done in the past is the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Inventory, which helped me better understand how much I avoid conflict. And, you know, it's ever since I've used that as a resource, it's helped me really kind of come at things more head-on when I do need to address a challenging situation. And what that inventory does is just really helps each person have a better understanding of their own style when it relates to conflict, because obviously we're facing that throughout our work at times. So that's one example of a resource. We'll make sure that that's shared. There's some other pieces, too, that we'll pass along. And if any of you, as we move forward, have some suggestions that you're familiar with that you'd like to pass along, just let us know. Okay, I think we're going to go. All right, so now you're going to hear from me a little bit in this next couple of slides. We just wanted to talk a little bit about opportunities for leadership on teams, and we've talked a little bit about this throughout the discussion today. So if you want to go to the next slide. What I did was just give you a few examples of team leadership models, and what you're seeing here, the next couple of slides talk about some of the different things that we've seen. Again, no two teams are the same, but often you'll have one team lead and some subcommittees. I put under, in case anybody's wondering what my little dashed boxes mean, you know, I for purposes of creating a visual, use 3 subcommittees, but we know several of our teams have other subcommittees as well. And there may be subcommittees, there may be committees under subcommittees. There's no right or wrong way to create your team and figure out how to delegate within your team. It really is figuring out for you what's going to work best to help move your work forward. Sometimes there's a topic that's really important to a couple of people on the team and may be critical, but isn't something that the broader team is going to be supporting, or not, and when I say supporting, just adding to or contributing to. So if it's more functional to have a small group that's almost like an ad hoc group or a subcommittee of a subcommittee, you can do that. That's okay. And those are great examples of things. If you ever want, as team members, to think those types of scenarios through with us at the TA Center, we're available. We're more than happy to talk through that with you and help you think that through. So these are two. These are probably the most popular example of team leadership models. Go to the next. And here's some other examples. Sometimes, and again, it fascinates me how different each team is. Sometimes you'll have a lead who is more of a figurehead, who is somebody who has been appointed often very high up by a very high up representative, whether it's the governor or somebody, maybe a commissioner or an executive commissioner and they are appointed as the lead. The point of contact, though, is the person who's helping really with the day-to-day pieces of the team in some instances, and they're doing a lot of the leading, and they're helping to oversee the subcommittees that are forming on the team. The other formula, which is the one that's off to the right, is where the point of contact is serving more as an administrative person. And that is often when we've seen that happen, that person is often the person who's in charge of all the emails and setting up the meetings. And oftentimes they're the person who's helping to corral the information that the subcommittee co-chairs are putting together and then sharing it with the lead. So my point in this, I wanted to share some examples with you, and you can go to the next slide. But the point is that it is very team dependent, but there are ways to make it work based on your action planning, based on your structure, and based on your needs. So, and again, there's opportunities if you'd like to brainstorm with us, we're more than happy to be thinking that through with you. So now this slide is a little bit more, goes a little bit more into depth because it's related to that implementation work. It's where we started off in the conversation at the beginning, where we were talking about moving that policy into practice, how all of you are now thinking about the next steps and rolling out and going into depth on some of these action items that you have. So you want to be thinking about other leads that are needed. And what we have here are just some suggestions and some ideas. There may be an initiative lead. There may be one thing in particular that you're moving forward very quickly on that somebody has to run with the flag on. And for those of you who I've facilitated, you know that often I will call that you're the shepherd. You're help shepherding it. We're not expecting that that initiative lead is doing every single piece of it, but is helping to coordinate it and make sure that the subcommittee co-chair and the lead has a sense of what's happening. The other category that we have here are regional leads. As all of you are looking, in some instances, you're figuring out what else in your community is impacting your work, and you may need some regional leads who have a better handle on what's happening in that region, and maybe they can be informing the process. So how are you helping them to come into the conversation, and how are you figuring out ways that they can be supporting your work? Okay. The next piece, and we touched a little bit on that, that power of the personal ask. There's also a power of delegating tasks. And there, again, what I have found, if you ask somebody and you ask somebody, one, to be on a team or one, to be a lead, and then you ask them to take on a task, often they will. As long as you're providing guidance as needed and you're helping them have an understanding of how they're going to exchange information with you, what is the process for your team and what is the most effective. I know what I've seen in all of the teamwork, the board work, even office work, when there's a deadline, usually that's when people are going to get their information in. So deadlines are great things. And what is the most effective way for them to be getting that information to all of you? Some of our teams, I'm on some of our teams' email listservs. So I know just about every single thing that's happening with some of our teams because I'm being CC'd on everything. It's just that's an approach that they've all chosen to use, and it's effective for their team. So those are opportunities as well. And then when you are delegating a task, you want to be thinking about the check-in and being available to troubleshoot as things come up. And finally, that last bullet, when necessary, ask. There may be something that someone again, I've noted about just asking someone to take on something, but then also if there's something you're concerned about, ask. If there's not a lot of communication coming, just ask. It tends to be it's something that sometimes we just need to be able to stand up and do that. So, okay, and then again, we've already touched on a few of these things, and I was glad when Catherine talked about that positive piece, and we've got that whole celebrating the success. Things that we have seen be extremely successful with our teams. We've seen really be the formulas for helping our teams be successful. That regular communication, which all of you pointed out early on, the consistent meetings as well. There's a balance to all of that too, especially as you're thinking about building out your teams as you're moving forward. It's how often are you going to be meeting? You as a team and subcommittee and initiative leads will be thinking about how often it's feasible and what you need to keep that work moving forward. There is no exact formula, but making sure they are consistent is important. Then the tracking outcomes and updating the plan. And then as you're tracking those outcomes and updating the plan and utilizing the resources that you have been given related to RAND and that support for the outcome measurements, as you're tracking that, making sure that they're shared with all members of the team. I am fascinated when I go back on site and we pull up an action plan and things start to get updated and people say, oh, gee, we can cross that off. There's an awful lot of power that comes from that because people are seeing what they've accomplished. It's not meeting just to meet, and it is allowing them to really see how things are evolving and moving forward. So that's very helpful. All righty, so now I am going to pass this back to my colleague, Catherine. And Catherine, before we transition into the next topic, I wanted to give you an opportunity. I wasn't sure if there was anything else you wanted to add related to the team composition and team models, and then we're going to transition over to strengthening that team leadership capacity.
I think that the only thing I would add is that sometimes those team configurations need to change. In other words, you might start off with a particular sort of single horizontal or vertical kind of team structure or flow, but the reality is that those things may change. So as you talked about, there might be initiative leads, there might be selected project leads, there might be regional leads, there might be task leads in terms of the crafting of finding appropriate partnerships with whom to have an MOU and those kinds of things. So I think that it's important to have stability in terms of people moving forward, especially in an all-volunteer team environment, but that those teams can morph and should morph probably over time in terms of as you become more skilled in understanding what the data is telling you and understanding what kind of reaction you're getting from certain communities where you've embedded certain strategies and getting feedback from that. There may be different shapes that those team structures can be. So it's just, I think it's important to note that as developmentally, remember many of these Policy Academy teams are now moving, as you say, into another level of sophistication, and that may mean, in fact, a relooking at some of the team structures.
All right, Catherine. So now I think we're going to just start talking about that leadership capacity, and it's in a way kind of a follow-on to what we're talking about, as people are evolving their team, their structure as it relates to the next action items. So I'll open that back up to you for your insight on this section.
Well, I think that this section is really, for me, kind of a combination of conversations we've had previously. So it seems to me that if you're going to if you look at the team structure, and again, I'm curious about how everybody else would see this question. Would their team structure lend itself to expanding the team leadership capacity, or wouldn't it? And I think that it's a very important question in terms of how do you then look at the strengths that they have cited in the beginning in terms of what role the leadership should have in terms of communication, in terms of facilitation, and in terms of decision making. What's the team structure that is going to encourage the greatest flow, and what team structure is going to encourage, again, the greatest amount of reciprocity? What team structure is going to account for the inclusion of everyone? So I think that one of the questions that I was looking at in terms of this particular area is how often are you communicating? In other words, in your team structure, what is the level and frequency of communication using the team structure? Is every meeting, everyone reports out? In other words, if you're a team lead or you're a initiative lead or you're a regional lead or however it may be, how often are you using the structure itself to be the means of communication? Or how often are you aligning the communication schedule with the presence of everyone on the team being available? So I think that I've heard from some of the teams at the Implementation Academy that some folks have daily call-ins. So there's a daily touch base with certain members of the team. 8 o'clock in the morning, they're going through a list of things that they care about or they're worried about or they are working on. But there was a small number of people that were chosen, or they chose themselves, to be a part of sort of an executive team that would be with the leader or co-leader, but they would be sort of the executive group that would have a daily call-in and or a weekly call-in with each other to make sure that the agenda continues to move forward. Then they would also be the group that would create the agenda. So who's creating the agenda, and does each team member see the agenda ahead of time, know their role within the structure about what they have to do, and is there an opportunity for input into that agenda? And then how often is the team structure itself being utilized to brief the larger leadership? In other words, does the mayor's or the mayor's staff, the governor or the governor's staff, who's responsible other than the leader or the co-leader for ensuring that there's an understanding about the leadership capacity as evidenced by the team structure, and there's an understanding of the team structure as evidenced by the leadership capacity. And so I think it's important to have that on a regular basis. There's a regular recurring opportunity for the team to know that leadership has been briefed and leadership has reacted and leadership is moving forward, and here's what they said about where we are. I think it's also important from my standpoint that you look at keeping your military structure and your military providers briefed, and your civilian structure and your civilian members briefed. And those may be different. You may have a different sort of hierarchical military focus for the folks in VA, in DOD, or for the National Guard, or for the TAG. That may be different than the way in which you want to talk about what the teams are doing with your behavioral health leadership, with your Medicaid leadership. It's important to kind of know how you're strengthening your own internal team leadership capacity to be able to sit on team structures that, in fact, can talk across, as I mentioned earlier, those various institutions with very, very different cultures, very different language, and very different institutional expectations. I think it's also important that I'm assuming that most of the teams are doing regular and consistent email communication, that there is a sort of a focal point for communication distribution to the team, that there's a single point at which information flows from the team's efforts out to all of its members, and that may be a daily, a weekly, a monthly kind of update that talks about, here's the information you know, here's the information you need to know, and ask the team members for feedback. Is this what you need to know in order to do your job? Are there other issues that you want to know more about? And then the communicator can decide what else needs to be either they need to inform the team members either by email, verbally in a meeting face-to-face, or by other or by another means, with a webinar, with Skype, whatever the case may be. I think it's important also to keep people apprised about the agenda of networking, partnerships, and collaborations, and let the team members know, because oftentimes they may know members of those other partnering organizations and collaborations, and they may be able to contribute to another team's initiatives or another team's efforts. And it sounded like some of the participants today were actually doing that, and were having the opportunity to kind of mix across different disciplines. I think it's important to do on a regular basis a pulse check. I think the team structure itself lends itself to saying, all right, let's take our organizational temperature today. What's the pulse check on the flow, the pacing, the expectations, the goals that the team is producing? And then if there's more than, one working team, how are those working teams organizing themselves around trying to have an alignment between the achievement of their goals, if that's appropriate? I think also I know I've talked with a lot of Policy Academy participants who say that they really do want to have an efficiency of organization, an efficiency of even though there's a lot of things to debate, there's a lot of things to talk about, people have a lot of ideas, but there needs to be an efficiency about how to conduct discourse. And there's a great training film that John Cleese did called Meetings, Bloody Meetings, which is really a fantastic video that helps people look at how do you discipline and exercise discourse in a way that is productive for people who are very busy and for people who care about this and who want to take action. And I think there are some of those things that you can do in a team meeting. You can do sort of a self-education on process, not just talk about the actual product and implementation of your prevention strategy. So I think that it's important to put those in play and to build the leadership capacity, again, through team structure, but have a team structure that in and of itself allows for the leadership capacity to be expressed. And I'm going to stop there.
Catherine, thanks so much. We had another couple comments. Tim had talked about that value add key leaders and SMEs with an eye on future development of efforts in the arena, really being strategic, and conduct sustainability planning as new team members are included or considered. And then he also really was talking about seeking opportunities to update the executive leadership of all entities that are involved so that they're all involved and informed. And he really thought that you hit the nail on the head. And, that piece is going to contribute to the sustainability. Catherine alluded to the sustainability earlier, too, in the conversation. Everything that you're doing, you should be thinking about if you won the lottery tomorrow, or all of you, took a Powerball ticket and weren't around tomorrow, how are you going to help with the sustainability piece? Giving that's important considerations. And thinking about, I loved Catherine's point about who's creating the agenda, especially as the team structure is going deeper and it's easier to have smaller team meetings. You still want to have agendas. One of the comments that we hear often when we're working with our teams is that they don't want to be meeting just to meet. And what will help teams keep moving forward is when they see what they're doing is producing results, which again is that outcome reporting and sharing, and also when they're feeling like they're not wasting their time and they're being productive. So I think a lot of this is, in a lot of ways, it's common sense. It's, of course, we all know that, but just to be able to hear from each other about what has really helped keep the work moving forward, I think is all worth considering. Okay, so we are pretty close to wrapping up here. The hour is just about finished. We have a couple more minutes. If there is Any other questions or comments, you can certainly type them in now. What we will be doing is, as I mentioned, we will send some resources over to you that were referenced. We'll include Catherine's slides and some other links. And if any of you have links or resources that you want to share, please feel free to email them to myself or Phil Patty. Tim also made another comment, just each work group will not operate at the same pace. That's an excellent point. And they're not going to use the same process. So to facilitate effective development, they've instituted a self-imposed SMART model. I know I've heard Tim talk about the SMART model. I know that that's an initiative or a model that has been used widely. We'll include a link to that as well. It does help keep teams on task, so that can be a great resource as well. So, okay, so let me just check in with Catherine. Any closing thoughts, Catherine, that you wanted to share before we wrap up?
Well, I think it's been a distinct pleasure for me to join Michelle and with all of you today. I am just, it's remarkable the amount of work that is being done under the mayor's challenges, under the governor's challenges, and all of the Policy Academy work that is going on. And the fact that you have taken time today to show your appreciation of the importance of leadership within the suicide prevention efforts, the importance of leadership in addressing the status of our veterans and the status of our military family is really reassuring to me. And I have felt very honored to be a part of the conversation today. I stand ready to, with Michelle and with the military service members, veterans, and their families, TA Center, to be of whatever assistance we can be in terms of helping you achieve your goal. And I deeply appreciate those of you who are staying with this and sustaining the effort and leaving a legacy of appropriate prevention and positivity for military service members, veterans, their families. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Okay, so one more note I just wanted, Tim actually shared the link with us for the presidential executive order, so we'll include that too, and thanks again, Tim. And I'll just put one more plug in. If there's any other resources that people want to tack onto here, just let me know or send them to me. That's wonderful as well. So what I wanted to share with you as we're wrapping up the session here is that we will be sending you a SurveyMonkey link, which will ask for your feedback. The format that we did today is a little bit different than we've done in the past, so we welcome your input. We want to make these sessions very usable for you and productive for you. So please use that as an opportunity to tell us what you liked, what you think we could do better, and also if there are topics you would like us to be focusing on that we can support you on as we move forward. What we will also likely do in the future is actually have a different platform so that we can hear from you. I know it can be challenging to have to type into the portal, and we appreciate your patience with that. But I think that's an opportunity in the future that we may consider as well. So if you want to weigh in on that, you're welcome to do that also. So with that, I know we're just about at the 4 o'clock hour on the East Coast. So if there are any other questions or comments, we'll keep the portal open for another minute or two. But I think we'll wrap up, and you can look for the follow-up resources from us within the next 48 hours. Thank you all.
Thank you.